All right, well, and I will turn it over to you at the end. If anyone in the room has questions for you, just invite those who are here in Louise Roberts' room to just come in front of the computer. That way Eunice can see your face and go ahead and ask your question as well. So turning it over to you, Eunice.
Yeah, so glad to be here. Thank you, Pastor Jacob. Good morning, everyone. I am so excited and honored actually to be joining your class today. And I want to appreciate and express my deeper appreciation to Pastor Jacob and Pastor Jane and the entire church actually for having me here. Like I told him the last time, I'm really inspired by your work and your commitment to intentional community engagement. And it is really inspiring for me and for the work I do. Yeah. And thank you for allowing me to come share about the African Christian Mission. And it is actually my indigenous context, as he already said. My name is Eunice. I'm originally from West Africa, Nigeria, but currently I'm in Pasadena at Fuller here, residing as an international student. Prior to Fuller, I was at Westminster Theological Seminary, where I got my master's degree in biblical studies interpretation. And afterwards, after graduation, I went to Duke University Divinity School for a THM in New Testament interpretation. And I'll be forever grateful for the professors I met, and in particular, Dr. Ellen Davis, who has been a great mentor, personally and professionally in every wise. And without whom, like he mentioned, I would not be here. I do highly esteem her. So today I will briefly share about the ongoing Christian mission in Africa. This is a very vast topic that I might not actually be able to cover here, but I will attempt to capture just a few aspects of the mission, especially as it regards to my studies and my vocational inspiration in Nigeria. For most of you, it might be more of an informative section that might not really directly apply to the American church, but I believe it will somehow expand your knowledge about ongoing developments in the African missions. And moreover, I also believe we are all body of the same Christ, and we are all part of the global church. So like Pastor Jacob said, my approach today would just to be to share with you what I've prepared. And at the end of the presentation of my presentation, I will take questions if there are any questions regarding to my presentation. Yeah, okay. So in talking about the African church, I need to kind of explain how I will be using the term Africa in our discussion today. I do not want to assume, I'm not assuming Africa, the term Africa as the African culture, African people as monolithic, as this singular structure, as most, there has been that misconception. I've had several occasions where people come to me and they're like, oh, Eunice, you're from Africa. I know someone from Africa too. Do you know him? Things like that. Africa is about 54 countries. Is a continent that has 54 countries with about 3,000 different ethnic groups and 2,100 languages. And each comes with their different unique culture. We have this multiplicity of culture, or you could say diversity of culture in Africa. So in this sense, when I use Africa, I simply am referring to a group of people that share the same historical experiences and share the same post-colonial struggles. So in that sense, it's kind of representative of this whole people, but diverse in its sense. So it's something more similar to diversity, unity in diversity. So having said that, I will briefly capture what I think is the present ongoing issues we are dealing with in the mission in Africa. In recent discussions in global Christianity, there's this observable shift of Christianity. If you believe that Christianity has a center, in theology, we do believe that. So there's this demographic shift of the center of Christianity from the global north to the global south. And by global north, we mean the Western countries, and global south include Africa, Asia, and Latin America, and almost all the third world countries. So on one hand, this shift kind of captures the decline in Christian faith in the West. And on the other hand, we see the immense progression of Christianity in the South. And this shift is expected to continue significantly in Africa. There has been several questions concerning this shift. How do we understand this shift? Why is this shift in the first place? And what are the implications of the shift for the future of the global church? Responses to these questions, again, cannot be covered here, but I will briefly consider what this shift may mean for the African Christian mission. And it's not an exaggeration. The explosion of Christianity in Africa in recent times is phenomenal. Just in 2018, Pew Research Center placed the number of people who identify as Christians in Africa at about 600 million. Pew Research Center is a non-partisan research body that provides reliable information about trends that are shaping the world. So they placed the number of Christians in Africa to about 600, and it's still increasing exponentially. And we see this increase more in the proliferation of churches. You see movements across the African societies where the rate at which the churches are springing up, especially in my home country, Nigeria, is amazing. Almost every street in the nation has at least 2 churches. This is not counting the home churches, what we call home cells. This is not counting house fellowship. So it is like so massive. So the question is, what does this mean for global Christianity? If there's this decline in the West and this immense explosion in the South, especially Africa, where I come from. Andrew Walls, who is he was a prominent British scholar. He described African Christianity as the representative Christianity of the 21st century. He believed that whatever happens within the African church in this generation may determine the whole shape of the global church history for centuries to come. And that's not just him. We have Philip Jenkins, who is a notable professor at Bello. He says that Christianity will become a religion of Africa and the African diaspora. So while some scholars kind of regard these postulations highly, others think they are mere exaggerations. But regardless the conflict of opinion, I think if these predictions are anything to go by, the future of global Christianity may well depend on the nature of the African church. Hence, for us, for the African church, the question is, the primary concern becomes how to understand the nature of this increase. In other words, what is the character or the direction of this increase as it relates to the future of the church in Africa, and perhaps global church in general. And also I need to explain that the character of Christianity is not monolithic in its sense. So we have the major traditions represented. We have Catholics, we have independent churches, we have the Orthodox, we have the Protestants present. And then there are hundreds of denominations with different creeds and what I would call customized beliefs systems. And so in its sense, the question for most African scholars at this point is, what is the character of Christianity, the Christianity we have in Africa. Many believe that it is more numerical in terms of, is more quantitative than qualitative. In fact, I read an article recently that kind of described the Christianity in Africa as more as 1,000 miles wide and 1 inch deep. I believe that kind of cast doubt on the depth of our theological interpretation. While I think that might be an exaggeration of the reality, however, I agree that some parts of formulation, our biblical interpretation might need a sort of revision, reformulation, whichever word you prefer. So the question might be more about the nature and the content of our biblical interpretation. And I'm going this way because of my training as a biblical student. Most of my theological training has been more about interpretation. So in any case, whatever kind of interpretation, biblical interpretation or approach we might bring to the African context, we have to, I believe it has to deal with contextual issues that are on ground. There's this recent discussion about contextual theology in the sense that every theology is contextual. In a sense, that is true because most of our biblical interpretation, even in scripture, has always been how to address ongoing issues, societal issues in a particular set. So in that sense, for whatever approach we might be bringing to interpretation in Africa, it would have to deal with the contextual issues that are going on in the country, in the society. And I will mention just a few of them, one or two of them, to kind of like bring in, to kind of bring together what I'm trying to say. For one, it is common knowledge that Africa has been at the epicenter of the fight against extreme poverty. We have conflicts, we have corruption in the high places, and other post-colonial challenges and struggles. And unfortunately, I would say that this socioeconomic situation or context has become great attraction for prosperity theology. Naturally, you know, most preachers will focus on giving hope to those who are in need or suffering, just to kind of, for immediate relief. However, some preachers tend to take advantage of the economic depravity and impoverishment to kind of manipulate scriptures for their own gain. So instead of pushing forth biblical interpretations that would nurture spiritual growth and moral sanctity, you see it becomes a personalized biblical interpretation. If you follow some of, I think International Mission, some magazines on African church, you would see some of these trends going on. I would want to clarify that I do not take for granted the 2 John 3:2 verse that has become I think the biblical grounds for prosperity teaching in Africa, mostly in Nigeria. I do believe that God desires us to prosper, to be in good health, and even as our spiritual life is prospering. But at the same time, I believe that the issue of alleviating poverty requires well thought out biblical principles that will be directed at addressing root causes of the poverty and not just trying to treat the symptoms of poverty, but actually taking care of the root problem. Why do we have this prevalent situation in Nigeria, where I come from? So another contextual issue, which is really a thing of great concern for the African church, is our relationship with the Christian, our relationship with our Muslim brothers and sisters, the Christian-Muslim relationship in Africa. Interestingly, as Christianity is increasing in number, there's also an increase in the number of professing Muslims. I think recently the number is at 446 million people who profess to be Muslims within the African society. So this kind of also kind of creates this tension, this fault line that requires wisdom and caution regarding how the church may navigate our relationship and attitudes towards other faiths. So there are so many other contextual issues, but I'll not be able to bring them up here. But why I'm bringing this up is the sense that definitely all of this influences to a large extent our approach to biblical interpretation. And for this reason, I think we understand that we cannot afford to gloss over or ignore how the significant challenge in biblical interpretation pose to the African church for sustainability, and for the need for us to kind of develop theological paradigms that will foster and not just quantitative increase, but a qualitative increase. Hence, for me, the question of what is the character of the church will be, what is the defining character that will sustain the church's growth in Africa, numerically and qualitatively, in a way that we rightly divide the word of truth. By this, I mean holding to biblical integrity. And also not just biblical integrity, whatever theological interpretation that we come up with must be transformational too, because I believe that the gospel is the transforming power of God. And if the gospel comes in contact with someone, there has to be both spiritual transformation, which in the long run brings about social transformation. So the challenge before the African church now becomes how to rightly engage the scripture within the African sociocultural reality to bring about spiritual and societal transformation while maintaining the integrity of scripture. And the goal is to construct a biblical-based and relevant theology for the African context. And I will tell you, we are taking this very seriously. In the recent theological discussions in Africa now focus on what we call formation and training of believers for theology and practice. So while evangelism is still needed in Africa, however, for sustainability of the church in terms of quality, we believe that in addition to evangelism and pulpit preaching, there is the need for this holistic formation that is geared towards building and training believers individually to frame the people and the activities of the church within a strong theological foundation. And when we are talking about formation and training, we precisely mean discipleship and theological training. Most times you see that when preachers come to Africa, I would use my own indigenous context, which is Southeast Nigeria. You see, we have these crusades, we have people giving their lives to Christ, but they are not, afterwards, they are not actually followed up, what we call follow up within the African context, to kind of help these people understand the basics of the Christianity they've come into, why we believe what we believe. And so this in itself, when we are talking about discipleship and training, we believe that intentional discipleship, discipline of people will bring about not just personal and spiritual transformation, like I said, we'll have transformed believers as leaders. And definitely, if the leaders of a society becomes transformed people, definitely the society will be transformed. Scripture cannot lie, when he says that when the righteous are in authority, the people will rejoice. But when the wicked are in power, the people mourn. So I will tell you that we are taking this seriously. And the only thing I see, and that is where my work comes in, is most African church in Nigeria organizations, they are working hard to see that both the church leaders, including pastors, are adequately trained for biblical exegesis. In Nigeria, my home country, we have several religious bodies that have taken up this charge of providing theological training for pastors and leaders of the church. However, such projects will always end up in the cities where, where you have the popular churches or popular congregation, or where Christianity in itself is when I use the word booming. And the rural communities, what we call villages, I think you call that country here in the US, we call those villages. The villages are kind of ignored and not incorporated within this, the ongoing formation that we are talking about. And this is where my work comes in. I came to the point where I began to intentionally consider how, in light of my biblical studies and theological training, how I may contribute to the mission of God in Africa. And my focus is on rural communities because, like I already mentioned, they seem not to be in the equation. And most of the foreign organizations that come into Nigeria, for instance, the focus is also more on the cities and not to the core places that this help mostly are needed. And it's not an exaggeration to claim that about 90% of local pastors in rural communities are not theologically trained. Some of them don't even have access to theological training, either for monetary reasons, linguistic reasons, or logistic reasons, whatever the case may be. And the thing is that if these village pastors remain untrained, we run a greater danger of perpetuating false doctrines. And though they might be genuinely zealous for God and the mission of God, the truth is they lack the basic tools for effectively carrying out the activities of the church, such as even in Bible studies, praying and all of those. Some of them don't even know the basic tenets of Christianity. So it's more or less like asking a baby to babysit a baby, or the blind leading the blind, which both scenarios is a dangerous situation. So in light of this, personally, we came up with what we call Theology on Wheels. It's an initiative, it's an ongoing initiative, still in the planning section, where most of the idea of Theology on Wheels is about taking theological training and this discipleship programs to these pastors in the villages. So we are the wheels carrying theology to the rural areas. And I've asked people, me, why theology on wheels? Why not online theology? And I would always tell them it depends on the context and what is available within the context in question. Within our area of focus, most rural communities, they don't even have access to internet. And they don't even know what a laptop is or a computer. And even if you give them one, they might not know how to operate it. We are still looking forward to the future where these things will become available at some point to the rural communities. But at this point, we are working with what we have. And that is to become the wheels for these people to take the theological training to them. So the idea is to take Bible schools to the villages. So we intend to develop a curriculum that will match specific needs of the local context. at no cost and right at their doorsteps, and in the language that they can relate to. So it must not necessarily be English, because most of the people don't, in my country, English is more like the formal language, but in the rural areas, most of them don't have that language as a general language. So to provide this in the language that they can relate to. And the aim is to produce, like I said, transformed and transformational leaders who having been disciplined and empowered by the Spirit will now be able to disciple others. And as such, we will have this organic growth that kind of like reaches out to all aspects of our formation as Christians, so that it doesn't just become, when we say Africa is progressing or increasing in Christianity, it doesn't just become about the numbers, but becomes about the quality of Christians and the Christianity that is coming up from Africa, that is able to bring the change. Sincerely, I do believe that the change in Africa, the redemption that we seek for the continent, lies with the church. Because the gospel is the good news that will bring the transformational change. I sincerely believe that. And the change has begun. I must tell you that we are beginning to see transformational changes, though it might not be at the pace that matches the extent of our contextual issues. But I believe God has promised the change. I take seriously 2 Chronicles 7:14, where it says, if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, I will hear from heaven and I will forgive their sins and heal their land. Modern Africa is desperately seeking the face of God. We know that's the only help, where our help the transformation we seek can only come from God. And with actual well thought out biblical principles that are not like wishful thinking, but actually doing the work that comes from, for me, first of all, from rightly dividing the word of truth and forming and kind of believers who actually understand what Christianity is, why we believe what we believe, and what it is for. I believe that the hope is not too far from coming to be in Nigeria. I'm really hopeful that it will not be too long when that redemption will come. And yeah, so that is what I have planned to present today. I don't know. Okay, I have a question here.
So I'm going to just, and so if you can take a look at the chat and see if there are any questions in the chat. Otherwise, have anyone just unmute their mic if you have any questions. There are not too many of us, so I think we should be able to do that.
Yeah, I do see a question on the chat about Christian nationalist movements. Yes, that is also part of, so we call them the African independent churches. That is also a very crucial issue, ongoing issue in Africa. When we call nationalist, I think is more or less a reaction against what we assume as hegemonic or ethnocentric approach to biblical interpretation, given our earlier experience with early missionaries and how our culture, the African cultural heritage, was kind of like pushed aside and was not actually utilized to kind of express the gospel to us. So most of these nationalist movements, what we call African independent churches, are more or less a reaction to those. And in a sense, I would not say that they're entirely wrong, but it is also a point of discussion, because that's why the issue of contextual theology is really important, in the sense that right now it is not more of reacting negatively against what we presume to be the problem, but asking ourselves how we can, within the consciousness of our identity as Christians, how we can really approach the issue of biblical interpretation from within our own cultural understanding perspective. How do I understand the scripture as an African person? So I think it's an important question, but it also depends on your approach to that, to whatever. So that will be my answer to that question.
Thank you. Thank you. Any other questions from our online audience? Ron?
Forgive me, I really didn't understand the answer to the last question. Is it your concern that the various African churches may have a entirely different response to social justice questions, and that is something that the rest of the world should not be concerned about? Is it your position that responses to social concerns in this country, where you are now studying, may be contrary to so many African understandings, that we can have 2 or 3 different understandings, or is there, as you quote, they all may be one? Where are you in this question, please?
I'm not sure I understand how you're articulating the question, but if you're asking if the African church is interested in social justice. Yes, of course we are. We bear the brunt of injustice, to say in many aspects. I would not even want to push into our colonial past, the colonial legacy, and how racism and others has to do with the African descent and those in diaspora. So definitely it is our cup to bear. So there's no way we would be not interested in social justice and that is ongoing in the West, if that is your question.
It is part of my question. Would you give me some examples? We are always instructed by other countries and the perspective that they bring to us and to all countries, each other. But if you could give us some examples, it would be useful to me.
Examples of how we have supported the other countries in the terms of social justice?
Some social justice examples, such as gender issues, diversity issues, inclusive issues, this sort of thing. Be as specific as you can. You are very helpful to us, and I want to be more precise.
So now you are more precise. Now I get what your question is. So there's a whole lot of diverse debates on gender equality, race, and all of those. For me, I think what is more highlighted within the African sector is the feminist approach to when we talk about gender equality, feminism, in the sense that given that Africa is more or less a patriarchal society, where you see more the women are not given the voice to express themselves. So in that sense, I think in recent times there has been that outburst kind of accent for that equality in our approach. Though I would not say it is making progress to an extent, but then is more or less like Africa is patriarchal in their DNA. So it would take a little bit of time for such to come to, for us to see transformation in that sense. But if we are taking it seriously, we are taking it serious. This is just an example that came to my mind to kind of answer your question. There might be other things, other points that I may remember afterwards, but this is just the one that kind of pops into my head at this time. Yeah, I hope that helps somehow.
So I have,
Yes,
thank
you.
Thank you, Ron. I have a question. You just elaborate on what you meant by Christianity or the church in Africa is wide but not deep. Can you elaborate on what you meant by that?
So that is a quotation that has been made about the African church.
Okay.
So there is more or less a question on our theological the depth of our theology. So that's the question. So I'm not the one making that quote. It was a statement that was made about the African church, that we are 1,000 miles wide in terms of we are increasing numerically, but our theology is not deep enough. That's what that means.
Okay.
But I do not, that's why I said that to an extent, I think that's maybe an exaggeration and to an extent, but that doesn't mean that we do not have to work with kind of like improving our biblical interpretations, just like every other context. So that's what I meant by that question, that statement, yes.
Great, thank you, thank you. Any other questions from our audience here or on our online audience? I think there's somebody, there is another in the chart, in the chat.
Yeah, thank you for that question. It is indeed, I wouldn't use the word a threat, but I would say a concern, because the truth is the US, every country, I don't know how far to an extent how you understand it, but every country around the world kind of looks up to the US for some kind of guidance or leadership. Is more or less, oh, the Americans are doing this, we should do it, even when it doesn't make sense at times. So I think it's more of a concern on when that model is kind of like transforming into something that has been argued against. You know, when we talk about democracy, America has to be that nation that kind of pushes it up as a model for every person to see. So when that begins to be questioned, it does becomes a concern for other countries of a truth. So yeah, so I would say it's a concern, not a threat, from my own understanding. I don't know if that answers the question.
So the American church is hardly the model for Christianity these days.
So you do not, there's this principle I have in life, you do not, I drink from, I'm in school here, I'm drinking from the water of the United States. So I cannot speak against, from the, is more or less like, I cannot speak against the cup I'm drinking from. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah, so but sincerely, I think to an extent, it might not be the model, but the support that the US still continues to give in terms of missions. There might be questions on how well, or the intention or the motives for the given, but it still makes a great help to the expansion of the church to other nations of the earth. So I think that is not something we can just gloss over, even if the church is no longer as expected within the US continent, the country.
So there is a couple of other questions. Let me read them out so that the audience here can see it. So the one question is, what is the relationship between the Christians and the Muslims in the villages? How does that play out?
It's not actually a good site. It's a very tension-filled fault line. And like I said in my presentation, that is one that also determines how cautious we become in our relationship with other faiths, especially Muslim brothers and sisters. So it is really a concern. And you know what, I think the Christians are more on the victim side because we are not, according to our biblical interpretations, we cannot take up arms to kind of fight against our neighbors. But for them, it is permissible. So there's that imbalance in interpretation, which is affecting the Christian side more. So yeah, that is something we are praying heavily about for God's direction on how to, I'm not an authority in that field, I must say, but this is something we are also praying about in terms of how to navigate our relationship with our brothers and sisters. And I will go to the last question that says, talks about the African, how we view US missionaries as a form of colonialism. I would say, I would not say yes or a no, because there has been a tremendous transformation in the US approach to mission work in recent times. And there has been this remodeling. I think the US missionaries are beginning to understand the consequences of how earlier missionaries kind of preach the word to the third world countries. So they are being more cautious. I'm at Fuller, and in most of the classes I'm TAing, you see that being pushed across to students on how to not, the best way to approach missionary work outside of the US continent. So I would not say it's no longer seen as a form of colonialism, but more or less, some would say new colonialism, depending on who you ask. So, yeah.
Well, yeah, that's a very interesting question. And last week's sermon, Pastor Jen spoke to the work and the evolving nature of missionaries throughout the world, not just in Africa, but throughout the world, as opposed to just simply, dictating what's in the best interest of a particular community, as opposed to listening to that community and responding to that community. So I think it's, it's a very, very interesting question, and quite timely as we think about missionary work, particularly from the United States. And certainly, given what has come out recently in the media, our respect towards Muslims as a country and the idea of, after 9/11, creating these Muslim registries, kind of following what occurred in World War II with our Japanese brothers and sisters, is a concern. Any other questions from our online audience or here? You want to wrap? Well, very good. Thank you. First of all, let me thank you for speaking. I'm Tomas Morales, by the way. I'm the chair of the committee. So I want to express my deep appreciation for you, and thank you for your time today.
Thank you. It's been an honor.
Great. Thank you. Bye-bye now.